Hey everybody, I'm Doug Heimberger. I'm RSI 95. I live out in Seattle right now. I am the head of finance for Amazon's operations. So if you came to hear about how we did that, you're at the wrong talk, because unfortunately I can't talk about any of that. So when we were doing presentations, I thought, why not do something fun and I'll talk about my pandemic hobby. So today we're going to talk about learning to fly and flying as a hobby, something fun, something interesting, and talk a little bit about how do you do it? What's the environment? What are interesting things that I learned around that journey? So the video behind here, this is flying into what I affectionately call the plane version of Geek Camp. This is a festival in Oshkosh every year. It gets about 20,000 planes, about 600,000 people. And for the week, it is the world's largest towered airport. This was flying in back in July. So this is not talking about Amazon, as I mentioned. So I'm not going to talk about my experience as a cargo loader or any of that, but I'm happy to talk about that on the side. Or, as I was just telling Chatham, our world's largest fleet of robots separated from people by fences, unlike the self-driving Waymo vehicles. So, flying in under 10 minutes. We're going to talk about why fly, risk factors, some things to know, some things I didn't expect and how I dealt with them, and some upcoming things that make it more interesting. So mainly I'm just going to show you photos, because for those of you who follow me on social media know half my photos these days are flying photos. Because they're generally pretty cool and fun as well. So why fly? A couple of photos from various flights that I've done. I mean, the primary reason is it's fun, and it's a good way to get where you want to go fast, and it enables doing things that you might not otherwise be able to do. So, you've got various photos of various flights and things, and obviously around the Northwest on a beautiful sunny day, it's about the best environment you can ever get to. So the views are great, and it's a great way to get where you want to go. My next photo, on the right, we flew up to Canada to go to Vancouver to have dim sum, because why not? We fly out to islands to have lunch. I flew down to Portland to pick up an iPhone because it's cheaper in Portland, sales tax, all those kind of things. It enables doing things that you might not do with a car. And let's be frank, after an hour of flying, it's a lot better than 4 hours of driving, because for one other thing, we have an autopilot that you can push. It's not quite as fancy as the Waymo autopilot, but still, you can fly by buttons. So why else? It's chance to play with cool technology. One of the biggest things in general aviation is that 50 years ago, you would fly around on a plane that has a bunch of round dials and knobs. You'd carry some paper maps. You'd be flying by, really navigating yourself very carefully around the world. Now you've got more technology in general aviation than you have on most of the planes that people flew to get here. All fancy touchscreens, sync with Bluetooth to your mobile devices to send your flight plans back and forth. You can play music through the system. It all just kind of works. And so the safety record of general aviation has improved a ton over the years, and the ability to get where you want to go has improved to the point where it's cool. So, this is a technology crowd. We should always talk about risk factors, because I think the first thing that people say, and in fact, when I go into work and I tell people that I'm flying, their first statement is, can the company take out more insurance on you because you're flying around in a tin can? There is an accident risk, and general aviation is not as safe as commercial aviation. Everybody likes saying commercial aviation, that the hardest part of the least safe part of the travel is getting yourself to the airport. Not actually true in general aviation. General aviation is closer to riding a motorcycle than taking a commercial flight. About one fatal accident per 100,000 flight hours in 2020. That's down by about 20% over the 10 years. About 205 fatal crashes in 2020. So, the important thing, though, is unlike riding a motorcycle, there's a lot more of risk management that is on you as the pilot. And, one of the things that you learn during learning to be a pilot is all the factors that you can do to reduce your risk. Obviously, you can't eliminate risk, but you can manage risk through, being very careful about flying around thunderstorms, being very careful about maintenance, being very careful about planning, being very careful about your own risk factors, and really having your own safety management framework around thinking about when should I fly and when should I not fly, starting with the default of not fly. Now with that, things to know, bunch of requirements. I went into this thinking, I'll just go and meet an instructor and go up and fly around for 40 or 50 hours and then I'll be a pilot. And it's not quite the same as driving a car. There's actually a ton of requirements that are kind of interesting. Among other things, you have to go and pass a written test. You have to pass an oral exam with a FAA designated examiner. You have to pass an actual test up in the air to fly the plane to standards. I would argue that our accident rate on vehicles in the US would be a lot stronger if we forced everybody to do this to drive a car, but it would also drive up the costs a lot. So, I started this during the pandemic. I flew once or twice a week for a while, took a lot of breaks because of various things. It took about a year to get a private pilot's license, about 80 hours in the air, about probably 3 to 4 times that on the ground. And generally speaking, when you think about it, it's an investment of about $250 to $300 an hour in flying with an instructor. So not a cheap thing, but it was fun. The other thing to know when you get a private pilot's license, you can't fly through the clouds. And so obviously in the Seattle area, that's kind of a non-starter occasionally. To do that, you've got to go and do the whole thing again, but to get an instrument pilot's license, which is teaching you how to fly completely with regard to the instruments, not looking out the window at all. Similar about a time commitment, similar amount of complexity, but at the end you basically can then fly anywhere except if there's ice, which in the Northwest, again, in the winter is a non-starter, but at least it opens up a lot of things that you can't do during the rest of the year. Things I didn't expect. So, I thought, again, hey, I'll just go get a private pilot's license, then it'll just be like renting from Hertz. I'll check out a plane anytime I want to go somewhere and, get some sort of rental plane status that gets me upgrades. Not really the case. Obviously, planes have slightly higher capital requirements and slightly higher requirements on using, and most of the places that have a lot of planes would rather have people doing flight training in their planes than let you take it out and fly it somewhere and let it sit for a day. So what was surprising to me was that it's hard to get a plane for more than 5 hours. And in fact, you really need access to a plane if you want to go do it for the things I'm talking about, like flying to Canada or flying to do something fun. If you want to go flying for anything other than just going to fly, you have to have a better access. And for that, there are a couple things that you can do, flight clubs and partnerships, and I'll talk a little bit about how I solved that after that. The last thing that I found that's kind of interesting and an interesting one for us to think about as a science community is that FAA has a very interesting set of medical requirements, and in particular is very frowning on any type of use of drugs or even visiting doctors for any type of psychological issue. ADD, hypertension, any of those kind of things are big red flags for the FAA. Most people who have had that at any point in their life end up spending thousands of dollars and waiting up 2 years to get cleared and have ongoing requirements. And it's probably the biggest shocker and the thing that disqualifies a lot of people. And so anybody thinking about flying, what I've learned now is go make sure you can clear all those things before you start rather than getting a rude surprise a bunch of the way in. So how did I solve the planeability problem? I built a plane, which is the next fun part. And this is my co-owners and I own a third of a plane now. I built a third of a plane. Turns out that you can acquire kit planes. And so we bought a kit plane out of South Africa, brought it down to LA, and then there are groups that will help you assemble it. This plane is certified as owner-built, so I'm the builder of record of our plane, which requires us to do 51% of the tasks of building a plane, but not 51% of the time of building a plane. And so we all went down for a couple weeks each. This is me riveting in between meetings for work. So people would ask how my day was going, and I said, I've been riveting. This is us building the tailplane. That's our plane about a year ago in California when it had its engine on, but obviously was not flyable yet. And this is what we ended up with, which is our plane. It's got a parachute. It's got modern engine up front that runs on about 7 gallons of Costco gas an hour to go about 150 miles. It's got about the same performance as my SUV while moving a lot faster and and obviously in a much more fun way than my SUV. So in conclusion, couple quick things. There's framework coming out from the FAA soon that's actually going to make this a plane that you don't have to go build yourself. It's going to change a lot of the regulations. It's also going to make it easy to fly as a personal pilot as long as you don't take more than one passenger, as long as you can go to any doctor and get a medical certificate. So it's going to remove a lot of those problems around drugs, ADD use, et cetera. And I think what's cool about that is going to end up with lower cost and higher quality aircraft. So with that, I will leave you with more fun photos, and thank you for your time. Hit me.
Do the planes vary in terms of UI? Like if you go into a different plane, is it confusing?
Yeah, so I mean, it is one of the reasons why it's not like just go to Hertz and check out an airplane, which is that the user interface can differ a little bit. And we have a Garmin setup in ours. There's 2 main electronic providers. The bigger issue is that right down to every plane has slightly different handling characteristics, slightly different speeds, slightly different procedures, slightly different boundaries on the flying envelope. And so I've now flown 4 or 5 different models of planes, and for each of those have needed to go up and get like a 2-hour checkout where you basically fly the plane at the edges of the flight envelope. So you stall it, you do steep turns, you do all the different things to basically understand how the plane feels in those situations so you can avoid getting into those risk factors.
So if I get on Delta Airlines and then my touch screen doesn't quite work like it's supposed to, then I'm stuck watching Abbott Elementary because I can't scroll past the A's. But if I get on your plane and my touch screen doesn't work, what do you, like, we've got a much bigger problem.
Yeah. No,
are
Yeah.
there solutions for this, or does that concern you, or do you have something to swap it out?
Absolutely. I mean, so...
That's like a Sony controller for your submarine.
Well, so, yeah, I bought my controller at GameStop. Actually, my controller is more... Actually, our sticks weren't on yet, but they're more expensive than ones from GameStop. So the first thing you think about is you think about redundancy of key systems. And I won't go into detail here, but we've got 2 fuel pumps here that are redundant. We've got 2 lanes. These are the electronic controls for the engine itself. So you've got 2 independent control buses. Basically, you've got dual redundancy on all the most critical systems. And in fact, a lot of people get this with only 1 screen. We decided to put 2 in because we actually wanted to have our engine instruments if one of them dies. Then we have a 3rd screen here. This is actually our backup instrument that if both of those die, we still have a 3rd. So you build redundancy into the most key systems. That having been said, there's 1 engine.
Yeah.
And that's the most critical piece.
I guess related, the Berg told me once, if you run out of gas in your car, it's inconvenient. But if you run out of gas in the air, like, how do you find, if I'm over Alabama and I don't know where the nearest crop dust or runway is, how do you find an emergency runway?
So
radio or?
You just push this button here and it tells you where they are.
Okay, excellent.
That's the easy answer. The short answer is, and this is what's really changed over the last 10 years. Almost everybody subscribes. I've got an app on my iPhone. It's got all the charts. It's got all the stuff. Like when we were flying back in Wisconsin, it also told us where all the cheap gas was. So we could actually plan our stops for every 3 hours we need to stop and fill up on the cheapest gas we can find.
Okay. I'm 10 times more likely to go flying.
There's a huge flight simulation community, and pros use simulation a lot for training emergency responses. Did you use simulation simulators at all?
Probably for about 10 hours of each of the lessons. More useful for the instrument. It's really, I would say just real quick on simulation, it's really easy to use to figure out how to run the screens, how to run the simulation. It's really hard to use to figure out how the plane feels. And I would say the most difficult piece for the whole thing for me was developing a sight picture on landing to not bounce the plane when you bring it to the ground. I can fly any single engine turboprop at this point, so probably a 5 or 6 seater.
Since you had to build the plane yourself.
Yes.
And you got to actually do that work, were there any interesting customizations you made because you got to?
Yeah, no, we got to design this whole thing. This is all custom, and then we did put in some extra air for heat. It gets cold. When we take this thing up to 17,000 feet, you lose 2 degrees Celsius for every 1,000 feet. It's pretty cold. So we added some extra heating ducts, some extra heat, little things like that. We're taking it down for maintenance in a month. We're going to do some little move this sensor here, those kind of things. Yeah.
So I'm pretty sure you have full flight, right?
Yes. That's what I was talking about. Yeah.
On the side.
Yep.
And every time when you try to fly, you will do the flight planning how you.
Yes.
iPad first.
Yep.
And you transfer to your flight computer.
Correct. Yeah, no, I flight plan on the iPad. We've got an iPad mount now. It goes on top of where those screens are. We Bluetooth it over. It Bluetooths from the G3X into the 650. Fly from there.
I missed some of your presentation. So how many horsepower of your?
140 turbocharged, does 150 true at 7 gallons an hour.
Categorized as high performance, right?
It is not characterized as high. High performance is 180. Yeah, it's got less than a 172.
Not 200 yet.
Not 200, yeah. Yeah, Mark.
Since you will soon be able to get one of these without building it, would you recommend somebody still build it, or should they?
It's a good question. I think it'll come down to what the costs look like. There are certain So this is characterized as experimental owner build, and it gives us certain privileges that you don't get if you buy factory, meaning I can update the software on this myself. I don't have to go take it to somebody to spend $90 to push the button. I can do my own oil changes. I can do my own stuff, which you can't do on a more certificated airplane. So I think we'll see. The regs are still about 3 to 4 years away. We'll see what happens at that point. I'm at time, but I'm happy to take questions on the side. Thanks, everybody.